The Eastern Front of World War II was a frozen, relentless nightmare. Endless forests, shattered villages, and snow that seemed to swallow men whole. It was a place where every step could be your last, where survival was measured in heartbeats and courage, and where the line between life and death was thinner than a hair. In the winter of 1943, the German Wehrmacht believed they had cornered a small Soviet battalion in the outskirts of a remote Ukrainian village. Intelligence reports suggested that the unit was trapped, surrounded on all sides, and facing certain annihilation. The Germans were confident, the Soviets were determined, and in that freezing, snowbound battlefield, a single sniper would change everything. This was not the story of a large-scale strategy, nor was it about the movements of entire armies. It was the story of one man, armed with patience, precision, and an almost uncanny ability to read the battlefield. His name was unknown to most, and yet his actions would ripple across the Eastern Front, altering the course of a desperate engagement. To understand how a single shot could save hundreds of lives, we must first understand the world he inhabited. The winter of 1943 was one of the harshest in memory. Temperatures plummeted far below freezing, coating every tree branch, building, and weapon in ice. Mud turned to slick ruts of frozen clay during the day, only to become jagged sheets of ice at night. The soldiers on both sides faced not only the threat of enemy fire but the relentless cold that could steal life as efficiently as a sniper's bullet. Food was scarce, ammunition was rationed, and the constant sound of artillery echoed across the landscape like the heartbeat of a sleeping monster, waiting to strike. In this frozen chaos, the Soviets had a secret weapon, their snipers. Far more than men with rifles, these individuals were trained to be invisible, patient hunters, capable of striking fear and destruction from hundreds of meters away. They were molded not just to fire accurately, but to blend into the environment, to anticipate the enemy's movements, and to wait for hours, sometimes days, for the perfect moment. And in the eyes of the Germans, who had encountered these skilled marksmen before, snipers were ghosts, almost supernatural agents of fear who could strike anywhere, at any time. The battalion that found itself trapped that winter was a relatively small unit, barely over 300 men. They had been ordered to hold a strategic village, a crossroads that controlled supply lines crucial for the larger offensive. But the German forces had encircled them, cutting off reinforcements and supply routes. The soldiers were cold, hungry, and exhausted, with morale teetering on the brink of despair. To an outsider, the situation seemed hopeless. Yet, these men had a secret ally hidden in plain sight. A sniper positioned on a ridge overlooking the battlefield. A man whose rifle had already earned a reputation among local commanders as impossible to evade. The sniper had been operating behind enemy lines for weeks. He had seen entire battalions fall, heard the cries of the wounded, and watched as comrades vanished into the snow. But he was patient. He did not act rashly, nor did he seek glory. His orders were simple: protect the trapped Soviet battalion at all costs. And in those moments before the battle reached its peak, he became the calm in the storm, the invisible hand guiding fate. What made his role so extraordinary was not just his skill with a rifle, but his understanding of human behavior under pressure. He watched the Germans meticulously, noting their routines, their moments of hesitation, and their overconfidence. He memorized the terrain, every ditch, every tree, every shadow where a German soldier might attempt to hide or take cover. And while the battalion's commanders worried about resupply and reinforcements, he quietly calculated the one moment that could turn despair into hope. It was a unique mix of patience, training, and instinct that defined this sniper. On the Eastern Front, where the line between hero and casualty was razor thin, snipers were often the unseen deciding factor in engagements that seemed hopeless. Yet few individuals possessed the combination of nerve, precision, and battlefield intuition that this man carried. He was not just defending positions, he was playing a deadly game of chess, where every move could either save lives or condemn them to oblivion. And then came the day the Germans thought they had won. Their scouts reported the battalion's position with confidence. Artillery units were calibrated, and infantry columns began to move in, closing the trap with frightening efficiency. From the ridge above, the sniper observed the advance. Through his scope, he could see the confusion and tension among the German troops. Soldiers whispered to one another, commanders shouted orders, and the sheer confidence of their encirclement filled the air with arrogance. But the sniper saw cracks in their formation, tiny gaps in their coordination, movements that betrayed overconfidence and haste. And in those gaps lay an opportunity, one that could save hundreds of lives. To understand the stakes, imagine the scene below the ridge. The Soviet soldiers, weary and cold, huddled in snow-drenched trenches, their breath steaming in the frigid air. Each man knew the Germans were closing in, each heart beating faster with fear, each mind wrestling with the grim reality that this could be the end. And above them, unseen, lay a man with the ability to change everything with a single, precise shot. It was a moment that demanded not just courage but clarity of mind, a moment that would test the very limits of human endurance and skill. The sniper's rifle was a standard-issue Mosin Nagant, modified slightly for long-range accuracy. But this was not a story of technology or equipment. It was a story of patience, precision, and timing. He would not fire until the moment was perfect, until the conditions aligned in his favor, until the shot guaranteed the maximum impact. And as he prepared, his thoughts were not of personal glory but of the battalion below, trapped and desperate, relying entirely on his ability to remain unseen, to calculate the impossible, and to strike with deadly efficiency. And so, in the heart of the frozen battlefield, a silent war raged. One man, perched high above, and a battalion, trapped and praying for a miracle. Every sound, the crunch of snow underfoot, the distant echo of artillery, the whisper of wind through bare branches carried the weight of life and death. Every second counted, and somewhere deep within the sniper, a calm resolve had taken hold. For he knew that one moment, one bullet, one chance could save an entire battalion from destruction. This was not just another story from the Eastern Front. This was a story of courage under impossible circumstances, of skill and patience forged in the harshest conditions imaginable. It was a story of a man who became the unseen guardian of hundreds, a single bullet that would decide the fate of many, and a winter battlefield that would never forget the shot that saved an entire battalion from annihilation. The morning broke cold and gray, the kind of dawn that seems hesitant to arrive, as if the sun itself fears what lies beneath the frozen soil. The German forces moved deliberately, confident that they had the trapped Soviet battalion contained. Their tanks rumbled in the distance, infantry columns crunched through the frost-covered underbrush, and machine gun teams established overlapping fields of fire. Every movement, every step, seemed choreographed for the destruction of the defenders below. But the sniper above had already accounted for it. He had studied the Germans' patrol patterns for days, noting their shifts, the moments when sentries glanced away, and the slight imperfections in their coordination. To an ordinary observer, the enemy appeared unstoppable, an unbroken wall of steel and discipline. Yet the sniper saw the subtle cracks, the hesitation of a lieutenant giving orders, the fatigue in soldiers who had marched all night, the slight imbalance in a tank crew distracted by the frost inside their armored compartment. These were the moments he had been waiting for, the moments that could turn despair into survival. Hours passed in silence. The sniper remained still, his breath slow, controlled. His body had become one with the ridge, wrapped in layers of camouflaged cloth, snow blending seamlessly with the contours of his rifle and the natural dips in the earth. Every movement was deliberate. Even a single twitch could betray him, could invite a burst of enemy fire that would end his mission before it began. Time stretched, frozen like the battlefield itself, as the German units crept closer to the trapped battalion. Meanwhile, the Soviet soldiers below held their positions, unaware of how close they were to total annihilation. They huddled behind shattered walls, in frozen ditches, in the wreckage of what had once been a village street. Their weapons were ready, their nerves taut, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Morale was fraying, yet in the depths of that fear, a quiet hope lingered, a hope anchored to the knowledge that someone above was watching, someone whose skill could turn the tide. The first critical moment came when a German officer stepped into the open to inspect his advancing troops. To any ordinary marksman, it might have seemed like an easy shot, but this sniper was not ordinary. He waited, measuring distance, wind, and trajectory with painstaking precision. He considered the angle, the snow's effect on visibility, the rifle's slight recoil, and even the officer's own tendency to adjust his stance. And then, after what felt like an eternity, he fired. The bullet struck with devastating accuracy. The officer fell, the formation faltered, and confusion rippled through the German ranks. In that instant, the sniper had not just killed one man, he had disrupted the enemy's coordination, forcing them to pause, to reassess, to hesitate. It was a small act of violence, yet its impact was enormous. Every moment of hesitation gave the trapped battalion breathing space, a fraction of time that would prove decisive in the coming hours. The Germans tried to regroup, adjusting their lines, shifting their flanks to account for the unseen threat above. They did not know how many snipers were observing them, only that something was wrong. Rumors began to spread among the enemy ranks of a phantom marksman, a ghostly figure capable of striking with inhuman precision. Fear began to creep in, subtle at first, but enough to make men second-guess orders, hesitate at critical moments, and abandon the rigid efficiency that had made them so deadly. Meanwhile, the sniper's mind was always ahead. He calculated every possible movement of the Germans, predicting their reactions like a chess master anticipating several moves in advance. Every shot he fired was aimed not just to kill, but to manipulate the battlefield, to create openings, to protect those below. And as the hours dragged on, he began to notice something extraordinary. The Germans, despite their overwhelming numbers, were beginning to falter. They were making mistakes. They were exposing themselves. They were giving him targets that, minutes earlier, would have seemed impossible. At the same time, the battalion below was gaining confidence. The sudden disruption in the German assault allowed them to reorganize, to reposition their heavy weapons, to set up ambush points. Soldiers whispered among themselves, unsure of what had caused the sudden chaos, but instinctively understanding that their survival depended on holding firm and exploiting every opportunity. And all the while, they did not know that one man above was orchestrating this invisible defense, one precise shot at a time. One of the most remarkable aspects of this sniper's engagement was his ability to adapt. Conditions on the Eastern Front were unpredictable: wind gusts, shifting snow, changing sunlight. Every factor could throw off a shot by meters, turning success into catastrophe. Yet he read the environment like a living map, adjusting his aim with almost intuitive precision. His training, experience, and innate understanding of ballistics allowed him to strike targets that others would have considered beyond reach. Some shots required him to account for 100 meters of snow-covered terrain, a gust of wind, and the subtle sway of a distant tree. Each bullet was a calculation, each pull of the trigger a decision that could save or doom hundreds of lives. Another fascinating detail lies in the psychological impact of the sniper. Soldiers in the 20th century often reported that facing an unseen sniper was worse than facing entire battalions. It forced them to move cautiously, slowed their advance, and drained their morale. Every footstep could be fatal. Every glance could be the last. The Germans were now trapped in this invisible pressure, uncertain of when or where the next strike would come. And it was precisely this fear, this hesitation, that gave the Soviet battalion the crucial moments they needed to survive and fight back. As the day wore on, the sniper's shots became even more daring. He targeted machine gun crews attempting to set up along key firing lanes, disrupted mortar teams calculating angles of attack, and forced infantry units to scatter. With each successful strike, the trapped battalion gained more breathing room, slowly shifting from a defensive posture to a more aggressive one. They began to reclaim sections of the village, using the openings created by the sniper to flank the enemy, ambush supply lines, and prevent encirclement. It was not just skill but strategy. The sniper's actions created the illusion of multiple threats, convincing the Germans that the battalion had reinforcements or that unseen marksmen were positioned throughout the area. Every calculated kill, every perfectly timed shot contributed to a larger narrative of control and deception, making the Germans believe they faced a far more formidable force than reality would suggest. Perhaps the most astonishing fact is that despite the intensity of the engagement, the sniper remained almost entirely undetected. Not once did the Germans locate his position. Not once did they come close to neutralizing him. His patience, discipline, and mastery of camouflage made him a ghost on the ridge, a silent guardian ensuring that the battalion below had every chance to survive against impossible odds. By the end of the day, what had seemed inevitable, the total destruction of the battalion, had been delayed, and what the Germans had assumed to be a quick victory had turned into a grueling, confused standoff. And through it all, the sniper remained above the chaos, the invisible hand that had manipulated the battlefield. The single individual whose courage, skill, and precision had kept hundreds alive. This was the heart of his story. Not heroics in a single moment, but the cumulative effect of patience, observation, and expertise. One man, one rifle, and the will to endure in conditions that would have crushed ordinary soldiers. One shot at a time, he rewrote the fate of the trapped battalion, proving that even in the most desperate situations, a single person could make the impossible possible. The sun had sunk low, casting long shadows over the snow-covered battlefield, turning every mound and ruined building into a dark silhouette. The air was bitter, cutting through layers of clothing, and the moans of the wounded echoed faintly across the frozen village. By now, the Germans were desperate. They had pressed every advantage, brought in artillery, and tried to flush the Soviet battalion from their trenches. Yet, despite superior numbers and firepower, they could not break through. Every advance was met with confusion, hesitation, and, unseen, the steady hand of a sniper controlling the fight from above. The decisive moment was approaching. From the ridge, the sniper could see the Germans concentrating their forces for a final push. Tanks were maneuvering to crush the trenches, machine gun nests were lining up for overlapping fire, and infantry columns were advancing in a wedge formation, expecting the resistance to crumble. The trapped battalion below was exhausted, faces streaked with mud and frost, hands numb from the cold, eyes burning from strain. They had held out this long, but they had no idea how close the enemy was to overrunning them. And in that pivotal moment, all of their lives depended on a single decision, a single bullet, fired with absolute precision. Through the sniper's scope, he could see the German commander coordinating the assault, standing boldly in the open to signal his troops forward. It was a perfect target, but dangerous. If he missed, the enemy could advance, crush the battalion, and annihilate hundreds of men. Every calculation mattered. Wind speed, distance, the slight tremor of his fingers from hours of waiting, even the angle of the sun reflecting off a rifle barrel. He exhaled slowly, steadying himself, and visualized the shot. It was the kind of moment that defined heroes in history, a moment when courage, skill, and patience intersected with fate itself. Then he fired. The bullet cut through the cold air with a hiss so soft it was almost inaudible. It struck the German commander with devastating accuracy, and the impact was immediate. The officer fell, chaos erupted, and the wedge formation of advancing troops splintered. Soldiers froze, unsure of where the next strike would come from, while tanks hesitated, exposed, and vulnerable. In a matter of seconds, the entire dynamic of the battle shifted. What had seemed inevitable, total destruction, was now uncertain. The sniper did not stop. Every follow-up shot was deliberate, each calculated to exploit the confusion he had created. Machine gun crews fell back, mortar teams were forced to abandon their positions, and infantry soldiers scattered, unable to regroup under the invisible pressure of the sniper's relentless accuracy. From the battalion's perspective below, it must have seemed as if the battlefield itself had turned against the enemy. They were finally able to breathe, to regroup, and to push back with renewed courage. With the Germans in disarray, the trapped Soviet soldiers launched a counterattack. They moved cautiously at first, taking advantage of the gaps created by the sniper. Trenches were cleared, machine gun nests neutralized, and barricades reinforced. The battalion's officers, sensing the shift, coordinated a disciplined push against the enemy's faltering lines. Every successful advance was made possible by the sniper above, whose eyes and rifle continued to manipulate the flow of the fight. The Germans, shaken and demoralized, eventually began to retreat. They had underestimated the battalion, but more importantly, they had underestimated the power of one man operating in the shadows. The frozen battlefield, which had seemed like a trap with no escape, was now a landscape of survival and resilience. Soldiers who had been certain of their death looked around in disbelief, realizing that they had survived against staggering odds. The sniper, still unseen, watched as the battalion slowly regained control of the village. What made this action extraordinary was not only the tactical skill displayed, but also the human endurance behind it. The sniper had remained exposed for hours in freezing conditions, enduring hunger, fatigue, and the ever-present threat of discovery. He had made split-second decisions under extreme pressure, guided by instinct honed through rigorous training and experience. And in the end, his single, impossible shot had been the pivot that saved hundreds of lives. The psychological impact on both sides was profound. For the Germans, the event became a cautionary tale about the deadly efficiency of Soviet snipers, instilling fear that would haunt subsequent engagements. For the Soviet battalion, it became a story of hope, courage, and the unseen guardianship that can turn despair into triumph. It was a testament to the fact that even in the darkest moments, one individual, armed with skill, patience, and determination, can make the impossible possible. After the battle, the sniper quietly withdrew. He did not celebrate, nor did he seek recognition. His mission was complete, and he had fulfilled it. The battalion, meanwhile, lived to fight another day, their survival a direct result of one man's extraordinary actions. In the grand sweep of history, such moments are rare, almost mythical, but they are the moments that define courage and heroism in the starkest of circumstances. This story reminds us that war is not always decided by numbers or firepower alone. It is also decided by precision, patience, and the will to act when every second counts. It is about the silent, unseen heroes who shape events from the shadows, whose decisions ripple outward to save lives and alter destinies. In the frozen forests of Ukraine that winter, one sniper became more than a soldier. He became a savior, a guardian of his comrades, and a living testament to the power of courage and skill in the face of overwhelming odds. And though history may never record his name widely, the battalion remembered. The soldiers who survived carried the memory of that impossible shot for the rest of their lives. A reminder that even when surrounded, even when hope seems lost, a single act of extraordinary courage can change everything. The legend of that day, of the sniper who saved a battalion against impossible odds, lives on, not in monuments or medals, but in the story itself, a story of precision, patience, and the undeniable power of one determined human being. In the end, the frozen battlefield grew silent once more. The smoke cleared, and the wounded were tended to. The Germans withdrew, the battalion stood resilient, and the sniper disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind a legacy that would be whispered among soldiers for generations. It was a moment when history held its breath, when the impossible was achieved, and when one man's courage proved that even in war, heroism can shine through the darkest of winters.